The evening sun was setting over the quiet neighborhood when Captain Rodriguez noticed the black luxury car driving down Maple Street. Something about it bothered him, though he couldn't say exactly what. Maybe it was the tinted windows, or maybe it was just the fact that he rarely saw cars like this in his patrol area during his evening rounds. Rodriguez had been a police captain for 15 years. He thought he knew his neighborhood well, and in his mind, expensive cars didn't belong here unless something was wrong. Without much thought, he flipped on his lights and pulled the car over. The driver pulled into a nearby parking lot, slowly and carefully. Rodriguez got out of his patrol car and walked toward the vehicle with heavy steps. His hand rested near his belt, and his jaw was set tight. This was going to be routine, he told himself. When the car door opened, a black woman stepped out. She was dressed professionally in a dark suit and carried herself with quiet confidence. She looked to be in her 40s, with neat hair and glasses. Everything about her appearance suggested she was coming home from work at some office job. "Ma'am, do you know why I stopped you?" Rodriguez asked, his voice already sharp and unfriendly. The woman looked surprised but remained calm. "No, officer, I don't. I was driving the speed limit and following all traffic rules." Rodriguez didn't like her tone. Something about the way she spoke, educated, confident, rubbed him the wrong way. "License and registration?" he demanded. "Of course," the woman said politely. "My registration is in the trunk. May I get it?" Rodriguez immediately became suspicious. In his experience, people who kept their registration in the trunk were usually hiding something. "Move slowly," he barked, "and keep your hands where I can see them." The woman nodded and walked calmly toward the back of her car. She moved slowly and deliberately, clearly trying to avoid any sudden movements that might alarm the officer. But Rodriguez was already on edge. As she reached for the trunk release, Rodriguez suddenly grabbed her arm. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted. "I'm getting my registration just like you asked," she replied, her voice still steady despite the rough treatment. But Rodriguez wasn't listening. Years of built-up frustration and prejudice came flooding out. "People like you think you can just drive through here like you own the place," he said, his voice getting louder. The woman tried to stay calm. "Sir, I live 2 blocks from here. I'm just trying to get my registration." Instead of listening, Rodriguez grabbed her more roughly and pushed her against the side of her car. The sound of her body hitting the metal was sharp and shocking. "Don't give me attitude," he snarled. By now, several people walking nearby had stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones and started recording. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. A police captain using unnecessary force on a woman who was clearly cooperating. The woman pressed against the car said nothing for a moment, clearly trying to control her breathing and stay calm. She knew that any reaction could make things much worse. She had seen too many situations like this go bad very quickly. "Officer, please," she said quietly. "I was just reaching for my documents like you asked." Rodriguez wasn't satisfied. He continued to hold her against the car, his anger growing instead of cooling down. "You people always have an excuse," he said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear clearly. The woman closed her eyes briefly, understanding exactly what he meant by "you people." She had heard this kind of language before, but never from a police officer who was supposed to protect and serve all citizens equally. A teenage boy across the street was recording everything on his phone. His hands shook as he watched the scene unfold. He had never seen a police officer act this way, especially not towards someone who was being so cooperative. An elderly woman walking her dog stopped and pulled out her phone too. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. "This isn't right," she whispered to herself, but kept filming. Rodriguez continued his verbal attack, making more comments about how people like the woman didn't belong in the neighborhood. His voice carried across the quiet street, reaching more and more people who were starting to gather. The woman remained pressed against her car, her professional clothing now wrinkled and her dignity under attack. But she kept her composure, knowing that losing her temper would only make things worse. She had dealt with difficult people throughout her career, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. "Sir," she said as calmly as possible, "I understand. You're doing your job, but I haven't done anything wrong. Rodriguez didn't want to hear it. In his mind, her calm responses were just more attitude. He tightened his grip on her arm, leaving what would certainly be bruises later. More people continued to gather, most of them pulling out their phones to record. The scene was becoming a spectacle, with at least a dozen witnesses watching the police captain's behavior. A woman pushing a baby stroller stopped and stared in shock. She recognized the woman being pushed around. She had seen her picture in the local newspaper several times, but Rodriguez clearly had no idea who he was dealing with. The professional woman took a deep breath and made a decision. Enough was enough. She had tried to handle this quietly and calmly, but Rodriguez's behavior was beyond acceptable. It was time to end this. She slowly reached into her jacket pocket, moving carefully so Rodriguez wouldn't overreact. Her fingers found what she was looking for, a leather wallet containing identification that would change everything. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, using his name that she could see on his uniform badge. Her voice was still calm, but now it carried a different kind of authority. Rodriguez looked surprised that she knew his name, but he was too angry to really think about it. The woman pulled out her identification and held it up where he could see it clearly. "I think you need to look at this," she said. The crowd was getting bigger now, with people coming out of nearby houses and businesses to see what was happening. Cars were slowing down as they passed, with drivers straining to see the unusual scene of a police captain roughing up a well-dressed woman. Rodriguez glanced at the identification she was holding, but he was too worked up to really focus on it. "I don't care what fake ID you're showing me," he said dismissively, but the woman persisted. "Look closer," she said firmly. "Read it carefully." Something in her tone finally made Rodriguez actually look at the identification in her hand. As his eyes focused on the official badge and ID card, his expression began to change. The leather wallet contained a gold badge and an official identification card with the seal of the county district attorney's office. And the name on both items was about to turn Rodriguez's world upside down. The crowd continued to grow, with more phones recording every moment. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next, though most of them had no idea they were about to witness one of the most dramatic moments in local law enforcement history. The woman waited patiently as Rodriguez's eyes moved from the badge to her face and back to the badge again. She could see the exact moment when recognition hit him, and his face went completely pale. Rodriguez stared at the badge in complete disbelief. The gold shield caught the light from the street lamp, and the official seal was unmistakably real. But it was the name that made his blood run cold. District Attorney Patricia Williams. His grip on her arm loosened immediately as the reality of the situation crashed over him like a wave. This wasn't just any woman he had pulled over and roughed up. This was the most powerful prosecutor in the county, the person who decided which cases went to trial and which police officers faced criminal charges. "You're..." Rodriguez started to say, but his voice cracked. His mouth went dry and he could barely form the words. "Yes," Patricia Williams said calmly, straightening her jacket as he finally released her. "I'm District Attorney Patricia Williams, and you just assaulted me in front of all these witnesses." Rodriguez took a step backward, his mind racing. Patricia Williams had been the district attorney for 3 years, and her reputation was well known throughout law enforcement. She was tough, fair, and absolutely refused to tolerate police misconduct. She had prosecuted more corrupt cops in 3 years than her predecessor had in a decade. The crowd was still growing, and now people were whispering among themselves as word spread about who the woman really was. Someone in the crowd shouted, "That's the DA. He just attacked the district attorney." Rodriguez's training kicked in, but it was too late. He knew he had made a terrible mistake, but he couldn't undo what had just happened in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. "Ma'am, I didn't realize," he stammered, trying to find words that might somehow fix the situation. Williams looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and professional calculation. She had dealt with many police officers throughout her career, both good and bad. But she had never been on the receiving end of this kind of treatment herself. "You didn't realize what, Captain Rodriguez?" she asked, her voice now carrying the authority of her position. "You didn't realize you should treat all citizens with respect? You didn't realize you shouldn't use excessive force? Or you didn't realize I was someone important enough to treat properly? The questions hit Rodriguez like punches. Each one highlighted exactly how wrong his behavior had been and how badly he had violated his oath as a police officer. A man in the crowd called out, "We got it all on video." He held up his phone, showing that he had recorded the entire encounter from start to finish. Rodriguez looked around desperately at all the phones pointed in his direction. The reality was sinking in that this incident was already being shared across social media. His career, his reputation, his entire future was crumbling in real time. "District Attorney Williams," he said, trying to sound official and respectful. "Now, I apologize for any misunderstanding." Williams raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstanding? Captain, you physically assaulted me, made racist comments, and violated my constitutional rights. There's no misunderstanding here." More people continued to arrive, drawn by the commotion. Someone had called the local news station and a reporter was already on the way. The story was spreading faster than Rodriguez could have imagined. A teenager in the crowd was already posting the video online with the caption, "Police captain attacks district attorney. Doesn't even know who she is." Within minutes, the post had dozens of shares and comments. Rodriguez tried once more to salvage the situation. "Ma'am, perhaps we could discuss this privately?" Williams looked at him with the expression that made clear exactly what she thought of that suggestion. "Privately? Like you gave me privacy when you assaulted me in front of all these people?" "No, Captain Rodriguez. What happened here happened in public, and it will be handled in public." The crowd murmured their approval. Many of them had seen police officers get away with bad behavior before, but this felt different. This time, the victim was someone with real power to do something about it. Rodriguez's radio crackled, and he could hear dispatch trying to reach him. Word was already getting back to the police station about what was happening. He knew his supervisor would be calling soon, demanding to know why videos of him were spreading across social media. Williams took out her own phone and made a call. "This is District Attorney Williams," she said clearly, making sure everyone could hear. "I need you to start an immediate investigation into Captain Rodriguez of the 5th Precinct." "Yes, I'll explain everything when I get to the office." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he listened to her conversation. An investigation by the district attorney's office was serious business. It could mean criminal charges, loss of pension, even jail time. "District Attorney Williams," he tried again, his voice now pleading. "I was just doing my job. I thought—" "You thought what?" she interrupted him. "You thought it was okay to slam a citizen against a car for no reason? You thought racist comments were part of police work? You thought excessive force was acceptable as long as the victim couldn't fight back?" Each question was like a nail in Rodriguez's professional coffin. Everything she said was being recorded by multiple people, creating a permanent record of his actions and her response. A woman in the crowd shouted, "Good for you, Ms. Williams. Don't let him get away with it." Others began to clap and cheer, showing their support for the district attorney. Many of them had never seen a powerful official stand up to police misconduct so directly and publicly. Rodriguez looked around desperately, hoping to find some sympathy or support in the crowd. But every face he saw showed anger, disappointment, or disgust at his behavior. He was completely alone. Williams put her phone away and looked directly at Rodriguez. "Captain, you are going to face the full consequences of your actions today. Not because of who I am, but because of what you did. Every citizen deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their race or background." The crowd erupted in more applause and cheers. Someone yelled, "That's right! Equal justice for everyone!" Rodriguez's radio crackled again, and this time he could hear his sergeant's voice calling his name repeatedly. He knew he had to respond, but he dreaded the conversation that was about to happen. As he reached for his radio, Williams spoke again. "Captain Rodriguez, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be powerless, to be judged by your appearance, to be treated as less than human. Because that's exactly what you put me through tonight, and that's what you've probably put countless other citizens through during your career." Her words carried the weight of truth, and Rodriguez knew she was right. He had treated many people badly over the years, always confident that there would be no real consequences for his actions. But now, everything had changed. The woman he had assaulted wasn't just another citizen he could intimidate and forget about. She was the one person in the county with the power and authority to hold him fully accountable for his crimes. As the crowd continued to grow and more cameras continued to record, Rodriguez realized that his life would never be the same again. Within 30 minutes of the incident, the first video hit social media. The teenager who had filmed everything posted it with shaking hands, still unable to believe what he had witnessed. His caption was simple but powerful. Police captain attacks innocent woman, finds out she's the DA. The video spread like wildfire. Within the first hour, it had been shared thousands of times across different platforms. People couldn't believe what they were watching. A police officer using unnecessary force, making inappropriate comments, and then the shocking moment when he realized who his victim really was. By midnight, the video had over 1 million views. News stations across the state were picking up the story, and national media outlets were starting to take notice. The hashtag #Justice4DA was trending, with people sharing their own stories of police misconduct and calling for accountability. Patricia Williams spent the evening at her office preparing for what she knew would be a media storm. Her staff worked late into the night, fielding calls from reporters and organizing the response to what had become a major news story. "Ma'am," her assistant said, knocking on her office door. "The mayor is on line 3, and the governor's office just called. They want to schedule a call for first thing in the morning." Williams nodded, unsurprised by the political interest in the case. When a district attorney becomes the victim of police brutality, it creates waves that reach the highest levels of government. Meanwhile, across town, Captain Rodriguez sat in his living room watching the news coverage of his own downfall. Every major station was running the story, and they weren't kind to him. Legal experts were already discussing potential charges he might face, and former prosecutors were calling his behavior shocking and criminal. His phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, his supervisor demanding explanations, and friends and family asking if the news reports were really true. Rodriguez stopped answering after the 15th call. The police station was in crisis mode. The chief had called an emergency meeting for early morning, and Internal Affairs was already opening an investigation. The union representative was preparing for what would certainly be a difficult case to defend. On social media, the reaction was swift and overwhelming. People shared the video millions of times, with comments ranging from outrage to demands for justice. Many users noted the irony of Rodriguez's behavior, attacking the one person in the county with the most power to prosecute him. "This is exactly why we need police reform," wrote one user whose post got 50,000 likes. "Officers think they can treat people however they want, but this time they picked the wrong person." Others focused on the racial aspects of the incident. "Look how his whole attitude changed when he found out who she was," commented another popular post. "If she had been anyone else, he would have gotten away with this completely." Legal experts began appearing on news shows to discuss the case. A former federal prosecutor explained on the evening news, "What we saw in that video represents multiple potential crimes: assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of power under color of authority." District Attorney Williams has a very strong case. The video quality was crystal clear, showing Rodriguez's aggressive behavior from multiple angles. Several witnesses had filmed the encounter, creating a complete record that left no room for denying what had happened. By the next morning, Williams was ready to face the media. She had scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m., and reporters from across the state were already gathering outside the courthouse. Rodriguez, meanwhile, had received a call from his supervisor at 6 a.m., ordering him to report to the station immediately. He knew this would likely be his last day as a police officer, but he had to face the consequences of his actions. The press conference was packed. Williams walked to the podium, wearing the same professional outfit from the night before, though. Now it bore wrinkles from Rodriguez's rough treatment. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "Good morning," Williams began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to address the incident that occurred last evening involving Captain Rodriguez of our local police department." The room was completely silent as she continued. "What happened to me last night should never happen to anyone. I was driving home from work when I was pulled over without cause, verbally abused and physically assaulted by a police officer who was supposed to protect and serve our community." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But I want to be clear about something. This is not about me being the district attorney. This is about every citizen's right to be treated with dignity and respect by law enforcement, regardless of their race, background, or position in society." A reporter raised her hand. "District Attorney Williams, what charges are you considering against Captain Rodriguez?" Williams looked directly into the camera. "My office will conduct a thorough investigation into this incident and all of Captain Rodriguez's previous interactions with the public. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, and if crimes were committed, appropriate charges will be filed." Another reporter asked, "Do you believe this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern?" "That's exactly what we intend to find out," Williams replied. "This investigation will not be limited to last night's events. We will be reviewing Captain Rodriguez's entire career and looking into any other complaints or incidents involving his conduct." The questions continued for over an hour, with Williams handling each one professionally while making it clear that justice would be served. She announced that her office would also be reviewing policies and procedures throughout the police department to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the press conference ended, more videos from the incident continued to surface online. Someone had filmed Rodriguez's reaction when he realized who Williams was, capturing the moment his face went completely pale. Another angle showed the crowd's reaction as word spread about the district attorney's identity. The story dominated local news for the rest of the week. Editorial writers called for police reform, community leaders demanded accountability, and citizens shared their own experiences with problematic officers. Rodriguez was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, which meant he would stay home with pay while the case proceeded. Many people felt this wasn't enough, but Williams explained that due process had to be followed to ensure any eventual prosecution would stick. The police union issued a brief statement saying they would support their member through the legal process, but privately, union leaders knew this case was going to be nearly impossible to defend. The video evidence was too clear, and the victim was too powerful. As the days passed, more information came to light about Rodriguez's history. Records showed multiple complaints over the years, most of which had been dismissed or resulted in minor disciplinary action. Former victims began coming forward with their own stories, emboldened by Williams's courage to speak out. The case was becoming about more than just one incident between a police captain and a district attorney. It was turning into a broader conversation about police accountability, racial justice, and the importance of treating all citizens equally under the law. Williams knew that how she handled this case would define not just Rodriguez's future, but potentially the future of police-community relations in their county. The whole nation was watching, and she was determined to show that justice applies to everyone, even those who are supposed to enforce it. 2 weeks after the incident, Williams' investigation team had uncovered disturbing patterns in Rodriguez's career that went far beyond a single bad night. What they found painted a picture of systematic misconduct that had been ignored for years. Detective Thompson, leading the investigation, knocked on Williams' office door with a thick folder in his hands. "Ma'am, you need to see this," he said, setting the files on her desk. Williams opened the folder and began reading. The first document was a complaint from 3 years ago, a black teenager claiming Rodriguez had stopped him multiple times for walking while black in his own neighborhood. The complaint had been dismissed after a brief investigation that concluded there was insufficient evidence. The next document told a similar story. A Hispanic family had complained that Rodriguez had searched their car during a traffic stop, without proper cause, terrifying their young children in the process. That complaint had also been dismissed, with Rodriguez receiving only a verbal warning. As Williams continued through the files, a clear pattern emerged. Over his 15-year career, Rodriguez had accumulated 23 official complaints, mostly from minority citizens. Almost all had been dismissed or resulted in minimal punishment like mandatory training sessions or brief suspensions. "How is this possible?" Williams asked Thompson. 23 complaints and he's still on the street? Thompson shook his head. "It gets worse, ma'am. I talked to some of the victims. Many of them said they were discouraged from filing complaints in the first place. Some were told that complaining about a police captain would be pointless." Williams felt her anger rising as she read more details. One complaint involved an elderly black man who had been roughly handled during a wellness check. Another described Rodriguez making inappropriate comments to a young Latina woman during a traffic stop. "What about his supervisors?" Williams asked. "How were these complaints handled?" "That's the most troubling part," Thompson replied. "Most of the investigations were conducted by Rodriguez's friends in the department. The reports consistently found no wrongdoing or concluded that the complainants were not credible witnesses." Williams discovered that Rodriguez had received regular promotions despite the complaints. He had been rewarded with better assignments, pay raises, and eventually the captain position. The system had not only failed to stop his behavior, it had actively enabled it. The investigation expanded to include interviews with Rodriguez's former partners and colleagues. Some officers were reluctant to speak, but others were clearly troubled by what they had witnessed over the years. Officer Davis, who had worked with Rodriguez 5 years earlier, agreed to speak confidentially. "I saw him treat people badly, especially minorities," Davis admitted. "But he was a captain and I was just a patrol officer. I thought if I spoke up, it would end my career." Similar stories emerged from other officers. They described Rodriguez as someone who used excessive force regularly, made inappropriate comments, and created a hostile environment for both citizens and fellow officers who didn't share his views. "He used to joke about keeping certain people in their place," another officer revealed. "We all knew what he meant, but nobody wanted to challenge a captain." Williams realized that Rodriguez's behavior had created a culture of fear and silence within the department. Good officers stayed quiet to protect their careers, while bad officers felt emboldened to act similarly. The investigation also revealed how complaints against Rodriguez were systematically buried. Internal affairs investigators who worked too hard on Rodriguez cases found themselves transferred to less desirable assignments. Complainants were often intimidated or discouraged from pursuing their cases. One former internal affairs investigator agreed to speak anonymously. "I tried to do a thorough investigation of Rodriguez about 6 years ago," he said. "I was told to wrap it up quickly and move on to other cases. When I kept pushing, I was transferred to traffic duty." Williams ordered her team to reach out to every person who had filed a complaint against Rodriguez. Many were surprised to hear from the district attorney's office. They had assumed their complaints had been forgotten or ignored. Janet Miller, a social worker who had complained about Rodriguez 3 years earlier, was shocked when investigators called her. "I thought nothing would ever happen," she said. "He pulled me over and treated me like a criminal just because I was in what he called the wrong neighborhood." Miller's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Rodriguez had accused her of being in the area to buy drugs, searched her car without permission, and made comments about how people like her brought down property values. "I filed a complaint because I thought it might prevent him from treating someone else the same way," Miller explained. "When nothing happened, I felt like the system didn't care about people like me." As more victims came forward, Williams's team documented a 15-year pattern of abuse. Rodriguez had particularly targeted young minority men, single women of color, and anyone he perceived as not belonging in certain neighborhoods. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Rodriguez had lied in police reports and court testimony. Several cases where he was the primary witness were now being reviewed for potential false testimony. Williams called a meeting with the police chief to discuss the findings. Chief Anderson looked uncomfortable as she presented the evidence of Rodriguez's misconduct and the department's failure to address it. "Chief Anderson," Williams said firmly, "this investigation shows that your department knew about Rodriguez's behavior for years and chose to look the other way. That makes this an institutional problem, not just one bad officer." The chief tried to defend his department's handling of the complaints, but Williams cut him off. 23 complaints, Chief. 23 opportunities to stop this behavior, and your department failed every time. Williams announced that the investigation would expand beyond Rodriguez to examine how the police department handled misconduct complaints in general. She suspected that Rodriguez wasn't the only officer whose bad behavior had been ignored or covered up. The news media continued to follow the story closely as more details emerged. Editorial writers called for a complete overhaul of police accountability. Systems and community leaders demanded reforms that would prevent future cover-ups. Rodriguez, still on administrative leave, hired a high-profile defense attorney who tried to minimize the significance of the complaints. The lawyer argued that Rodriguez was a dedicated officer who had made some mistakes but didn't deserve to have his career destroyed. However, the attorney's job became much harder as more evidence emerged and more victims spoke out. The case was building into something much larger than anyone had initially expected. Williams knew that prosecuting Rodriguez would be challenging, but she also knew that the evidence was strong. More importantly, she understood that this case represented a chance to fundamentally change how police misconduct was handled in their community. This isn't just about one officer, she told her staff. This is about whether we're going to continue accepting a system that allows officers to abuse their power without consequences. As the investigation continued, Williams prepared for the legal battle ahead. She knew that Rodriguez and his supporters would fight hard, but she was determined to prove that no one, not even a police captain, was above the law. 6 months after that fateful evening encounter, District Attorney Williams stood before a packed courtroom as the jury delivered their verdict. The trial of Captain Rodriguez had captured national attention, becoming a symbol of the fight for police accountability and equal justice. We, the jury, find the defendant, Captain Rodriguez, guilty on all counts, the foreman announced. The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Supporters of Williams and police reform celebrated quietly, while Rodriguez's family and police union representatives sat in stunned silence. For the first time in the county's history, a high-ranking police officer had been convicted of serious crimes against a citizen. Rodriguez was found guilty of assault, civil rights violations, abuse of power, and perjury. The evidence had been overwhelming: multiple video angles, dozens of witnesses, and a pattern of misconduct spanning his entire career. During the trial, Prosecutor Johnson had methodically presented the case to the jury. This is about more than one bad night, she had argued. This is about a 15-year pattern of abuse that was ignored, covered up, and enabled by a broken system. The defense attorney had tried to portray Rodriguez as a dedicated officer who made a mistake under pressure. But the mountain of evidence from previous victims made that argument impossible to maintain. 28 former victims had testified during the trial, sharing their experiences with Rodriguez over the years. Their stories painted a clear picture of an officer who routinely violated citizens' rights, particularly targeting minorities, and anyone he perceived as not belonging in certain areas. Judge Martinez sentenced Rodriguez to 4 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the sentencing guidelines. Captain Rodriguez, you swore an oath to protect and serve all citizens equally, the judge said. Instead, you used your badge and authority to intimidate, abuse, and violate the rights of the very people you were supposed to protect. But the Rodriguez case was just the beginning of larger changes in the police department and community. Williams had used the momentum from the case to push through comprehensive reforms that would prevent similar incidents in the future. The police department now required all officers to wear body cameras during any interaction with the public. These cameras couldn't be turned off by individual officers and automatically uploaded footage to an independent server for review. A new independent oversight board was created, with members chosen by community leaders rather than police officials. This board had the power to investigate complaints, review use of force incidents, and recommend disciplinary action. All officers were required to complete enhanced training on constitutional rights, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. The training included sessions led by community members who had experienced police misconduct. Williams also implemented a new policy in her office, requiring prosecutors to thoroughly review any case where an officer had a history of complaints or misconduct allegations. This policy had already led to the dismissal of several cases where officers' credibility was questionable. Chief Anderson had been forced to retire early as more evidence emerged about his role in covering up misconduct complaints. The new chief, brought in from outside the department, was committed to changing the culture and rebuilding community trust. The changes weren't just happening in law enforcement. Williams worked with community leaders to create new programs focused on building better relationships between police and residents. Monthly community meetings were established where residents could speak directly with police officials about their concerns. These meetings were filmed and broadcast on local television, ensuring transparency in police-community communications. A civilian review panel was created to evaluate all major police policies and procedures. Community members now had a voice in decisions about how their police department operated. Williams also established a victim services program specifically for people who had experienced police misconduct. This program provided legal assistance, counseling services, and help navigating the complaint process. The impact extended beyond just policy changes. The Rodriguez case had sparked a broader conversation about racism and justice that reached into schools, workplaces, and community organizations throughout the county. Local high schools began teaching courses on civil rights and constitutional protections. Students learned about their rights during police encounters and how to report misconduct safely. Businesses and organizations implemented diversity training programs, recognizing that the problems exposed by the Rodriguez case reflected broader, societal issues that needed to be addressed. Williams became a national figure in the movement for criminal justice reform. She was invited to speak at conferences across the country, sharing the story of how one incident had led to systematic change. "What happened to me that night could have happened to anyone," she would tell audiences. "The only difference was that I had the power and platform to fight back." Real reform means ensuring that every citizen, regardless of their position or background, is treated with dignity and respect. The Rodriguez case also inspired similar investigations in other counties and states. Prosecutors across the country began taking harder looks at officer misconduct cases, and several other high-ranking officers faced criminal charges for abusing their authority. A year after Rodriguez's conviction, Williams released a report showing significant improvements in police-community relations. Complaints against officers had dropped by 60%, use of force incidents were down by 40%, and community trust in law enforcement was slowly being rebuilt. The report also showed that crime rates had not increased despite the reforms, contradicting critics who had argued that holding officers accountable would make communities less safe. Rodriguez appealed his conviction, but the appellate court upheld the jury's verdict and the judge's sentence. He served 3.5 years in prison before being released on parole. His law enforcement career was over, and he faced ongoing civil lawsuits from many of his victims. Many of the officers who had witnessed Rodriguez's misconduct over the years expressed relief that they could finally speak honestly about what they had seen. Several became advocates for police reform within their own department. "I should have spoken up years ago," Officer Davis admitted at a community meeting. "I let my fear of retaliation prevent me from protecting citizens. That was wrong, and I'm committed to doing better." The teenage boy who had recorded the original incident became a local hero and received a civic award for his courage in documenting the truth. His video had made justice possible and sparked changes that would protect countless future victims. Williams continued serving as district attorney, using her experience to advocate for fair treatment of all citizens. She never forgot the feeling of being powerless during Rodriguez's attack, and she worked every day to ensure that others would never have to experience the same injustice. The case became a landmark example of how the justice system could work. When prosecutors, community members, and good police officers work together to hold bad actors accountable, justice isn't just about punishing those who break the law, Williams reflected years later. It's about creating systems that prevent injustice from happening in the first place. Real change happens when we stop accepting that abuse of power is inevitable and start demanding that everyone including those in authority, be held to the same standards of decency and respect. The Rodriguez case proved that no one is above the law, and that even the most powerful people can be held accountable when communities demand justice. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been victimized by those who were supposed to protect them, showing that speaking truth to power can create lasting change.